What was meant to be a routine late-night appearance spiraled into one of the most unforgettable moments ever captured on network television. South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem walked into Jimmy Kimmel's studio expecting sharp questions and political jabs, but nothing could have prepared either of them for what would unfold. The tension was immediate. The clash was electric. And by the end, the entire studio was on edge. Was it a setup? Was it political theater? Or was this a raw glimpse into what happens when scripted television collides with someone who refuses to be silenced? This is not just another celebrity controversy or partisan squabble. This is a story about what happens when the curtain is pulled back, when a guest refuses to play along and the host loses control of his own stage. Make sure to like and subscribe to catch every second of this explosive confrontation. The night was just beginning when Kristi Noem stepped into the brightly lit set of Jimmy Kimmel Live. The audience clapped politely as the cameras rolled, capturing her poised smile as she took her seat across from Kimmel. A seasoned politician, she was used to the glare of the public eye, but tonight would be different. She could feel it in the air. Kimmel's usual charm was absent. His smile was tight, almost forced, and his eyes, typically filled with playful mischief, had a sharper edge to them tonight. Noem could sense that the night's banter was not going to be about her political achievements or policy discussions, but rather about personal digs and pointed questions. She had braced herself for this moment. "So, Kristi," Kimmel began, adjusting his papers for effect, "let's talk about South Dakota. You're making some bold moves down there. What's it like being in charge of a state that, let's be honest, most people outside the Midwest probably couldn't even find on a map?" The question was a classic Kimmel jab, playful yet laced with an undercurrent of sarcasm. The audience chuckled, but Noem's response was immediate, cutting through the laughter like a sharp knife. "Actually, Jimmy, I think most people know exactly where South Dakota is. It's the place that doesn't wait for Washington's approval to get things done. Maybe you should visit sometime. You might learn something about real leadership." A ripple of surprise ran through the audience. Kimmel, clearly not expecting such a direct reply, blinked. But he quickly recovered, leaning in. "Touché, Governor. But let's be real. You've made some choices in your time, standing firm against public health measures, pushing back on federal government mandates. Do you really think that's responsible leadership?" The shift in tone was palpable. The room seemed to hold its breath as Kimmel leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if expecting Noem to back down. Instead, she stood her ground, her voice steady. "Responsibility is about doing what's right for the people, not doing what's popular or convenient. I've been in this game long enough to know that political correctness doesn't solve problems. It just perpetuates them." The tension in the room was building, and Noem was clearly in command of the conversation. The audience, which had been clapping and laughing moments ago, was now hanging on her every word. Kimmel's confident smirk had faded, replaced by a look of uncertainty. He wasn't prepared for this kind of confrontation, but Noem wasn't finished. "I think what's really going on here, Jimmy," she continued, "is you're looking for a headline, something juicy, something that fits the narrative. But the truth doesn't fit neatly into your sound bites. And that's why people are tired of the media, tired of the political game." The words hung in the air. For a moment it seemed like the whole room was suspended in silence. Kimmel's next words were slower, more deliberate. "Well, it's my job to ask the tough questions, and I think you're avoiding the hard ones." Noem's eyes locked with his. The audience could feel the shift. Something had changed. She was no longer just a politician answering questions. She was challenging him, and in that moment she wasn't backing down. "Hard questions?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "You mean the ones where you try to paint me as the villain because I stand for what I believe in? Because I'm not afraid to fight for the people I represent?" The question lingered in the air, daring Kimmel to respond. He opened his mouth, But the words didn't come as easily now. The audience, which had been laughing moments ago, was now eerily quiet, sensing that the conversation had shifted from playful banter to something far more charged. Kimmel's nervous laughter broke the silence, but it was forced, shallow. "Well, we can talk about the villain narrative later, Governor. But you've got to admit, not everyone agrees with your approach." "Not everyone needs to agree with me, Jimmy," Noem replied, her voice calm but firm. "That's the beauty of America. We don't all have to think the same, but we do have to be willing to stand up for what's right, even if it means facing criticism." And there it was. The line had been crossed. Kimmel's playful persona was gone, and the room was filled with an uncomfortable energy. For the first time, the audience wasn't sure if they were watching an interview or a confrontation. The question now was simple. Would Kimmel let it go, or would he escalate the tension further? Kimmel's usual composure seemed to be slipping, the layers of his late-night persona cracking as he struggled to regain control of the conversation. The audience, now fully aware that this wasn't just another scripted interview, watched closely, some holding their breath in anticipation. Noem, on the other hand, remained calm, poised in the face of Kimmel's increasingly pointed remarks. He took a deep breath, adjusting himself in his chair as if trying to steady his thoughts. Then, with a forced chuckle, he leaned in. "So, Governor, you're claiming that people are just tired of the media, tired of the political correctness," Kimmel began, his tone laced with skepticism. "But let's be real here. Your actions have put you at odds with a lot of people. People who might see you as more interested in your own image than actually doing the right thing. You've made national headlines for defying federal orders. Is that really what's best for your state?" The question was sharp, calculated. Kimmel was digging in, but Noem wasn't backing down. Her eyes remained steady, unwavering, and her response was delivered with precision. "Jimmy, you're asking if defying the federal government is what's best for my state. But here's the thing. When Washington comes in with mandates that harm the people of South Dakota, it's my job to protect them. I didn't get into politics to follow the crowd or to make decisions based on fear of what the media might say. I'm here to do what's right, even if it means standing alone." The audience was split between murmurs of approval and disbelief. Kimmel's smirk faltered, but he quickly regained his footing. He wasn't used to being on the defensive, and he wasn't about to let a politician make him look weak in front of millions. "But don't you think that when you go against the grain like that, you're creating more division?" Kimmel pressed, his voice rising slightly. "You're stoking fires, not putting them out. People are looking to their leaders for solutions, not for more conflict." The accusation hung in the air, a challenge that Noem couldn't ignore. She leaned forward, her gaze sharp as she met his words head-on. "Division is a natural byproduct of standing up for what's right. You can't make everyone happy. And let's not pretend that political correctness has brought us closer together. It hasn't. It's only made people afraid to speak the truth. So yeah, maybe I'm stirring the pot, but sometimes you have to shake things up to get results." Kimmel looked at her, momentarily taken aback. The audience seemed to tense, unsure of where this exchange was headed. But Noem wasn't finished, and she knew she had to take control now, or risk letting Kimmel steer the conversation into safe, familiar territory. "Let me ask you something, Jimmy," she said, her voice suddenly cutting through the tension. "When's the last time a politician stood up on your show and actually challenged the narrative instead of playing into it? You've had countless guests who toe the line, say what's expected. But I'm not here for that. I'm here to speak the truth, whether you like it or not." The room was electric. Noem's words weren't just bold. They were a direct challenge to everything Kimmel had come to expect from his guests. This wasn't just a political clash. This was a fight for control of the stage, for control of the narrative. The studio grew eerily quiet as Kimmel, visibly rattled, tried to recover. He opened his mouth, but no words came out at first. He swallowed, then spoke, trying to regain his signature calm. "Okay, Kristi," Kimmel said, his voice tinged with frustration. "I get it. You're not here to play by the rules. But what happens when your actions cause more harm than good? When your decisions divide the nation even further?" For a brief moment Noem paused, her expression unwavering. Then, with a calmness that sent a shiver through the audience, she replied, "Maybe, Jimmy, it's time we stopped asking if what we're doing will cause division. Maybe the real question is, what are we willing to lose to do what's right?" Her words hung in the air, daring him to respond, daring the audience to process the weight of what she had just said. It wasn't just a political statement. It was a personal challenge, one that hit at the heart of everything Kimmel represented. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, thick and charged with the tension that had been building since the moment Noem walked on set. And then, just as the uncomfortable quiet began to feel unbearable, Kimmel, no longer smiling, responded, "All right, I think we've heard enough." And with those words, the direction of the interview shifted. Permanently. The tension in the room was now palpable, the silence almost suffocating. Kimmel's usual quick wit and charm were nowhere to be found. The once lively energy of the studio had given way to a stifling heaviness, with every camera angle capturing the shifting dynamics. The audience, uncertain of how to react, exchanged uneasy glances. They had witnessed many fiery interviews before, but this was different. This was more than just a political debate. It was a personal clash, one that had turned the late-night show's set into a battleground. Kimmel, his face flushed with frustration, tried to regain control, but it was clear that he was no longer the one leading the conversation. His scripted questions, meant to be casual jabs, had failed. Noem had dismantled them with ease, each answer more assertive than the last. He couldn't help but feel the sting of being outmaneuvered in his own domain. "So you're saying that everything you do is justifiable because you think it's right?" Kimmel asked, his voice shaking slightly, betraying the calm facade he had built over the years. "That you're above the criticism? That your judgment is infallible?" Noem didn't flinch. Her posture was upright, her expression resolute. "I didn't say I'm infallible, Jimmy," she replied, her voice steady. "But I'm not afraid to make tough choices, even when they aren't popular. Leadership isn't about playing it safe. It's about standing firm, even when the world tells you to back down." The audience remained silent, hanging on every word. They could feel the energy in the room shift, the sense of a tipping point approaching. Kimmel was no longer the host. He was now the one being challenged, forced to reckon with someone who wasn't going to back down. Kimmel exhaled sharply, then leaned forward, trying to mask his growing irritation with a forced smile. "You keep talking about standing firm, but what if standing firm means putting people's lives at risk? You think that's what leadership is?" He pressed, his voice rising, betraying a crack in his usual easygoing demeanor. Noem's response came quickly, cutting through his agitation with surgical precision. "Leadership isn't about appeasing every opinion or worrying about what people think of you. Leadership is about doing what's right, even when it's hard. You think I don't hear the criticism? You think I don't know the consequences of my decisions? But if we're going to take risks, then let's take them for the right reasons." The studio was still. The audience, who had once been unsure about where this conversation was headed, now seemed to realize they were witnessing something historic. Noem wasn't just defending her policies anymore. She was defending the very essence of what it meant to lead, unapologetically, without fear of the media or public backlash. And then, just as Kimmel was about to respond, a surprising shift took place. Noem, with calm authority, leaned back in her chair, a subtle change in posture that conveyed something else entirely: control. It was a quiet statement of dominance, one that sent a ripple through the room. She wasn't just a politician answering questions anymore. She was in charge of this conversation. "You want to talk about risks, Jimmy?" Let's talk about your risks. You've spent your career making jokes about politicians, poking fun at anyone who doesn't align with your views. But when it comes to real leadership, when it comes to taking actual responsibility, you don't get to just sit behind a desk and pass judgment. There it was, the moment the room had been waiting for. Kimmel, who had once been the one delivering the punches, now found himself the target of one of his own sharp critiques. For the first time in the interview, his trademark smirk faltered completely. He swallowed hard, realizing that he had underestimated the strength of his guest. The audience, sensing the shift, began to murmur. The energy in the room had completely turned. Noem wasn't just holding her ground, she was taking control of the narrative. Kimmel, for all his experience, was starting to feel like the intruder on his own show. Kimmel's next words came out slowly, measured, as if he were carefully choosing his response. "So what? You think I'm just sitting here making jokes about you and that's it?" he asked, his voice laced with incredulity. "That I'm not taking anything seriously?" "No," Noem replied, her voice unwavering. "I'm saying that you think you can pick apart someone's character for entertainment, but when the tables are turned, you can't handle the heat." For a moment, it seemed as though Kimmel might explode. But something else happened. His eyes narrowed, and the realization hit him. He had lost control of this exchange. This wasn't just about politics anymore. This was about power. And Noem, in her quiet confidence, was taking it from him. With the audience still silent, the gravity of the moment weighed heavily on everyone present. Kimmel could feel the sting of his own vulnerability, something rare for someone who had mastered the art of controlling conversations on live television. The studio had become a battleground, and Noem had emerged victorious, at least for now. But would this be the end of their clash, or was Kimmel about to escalate things even further? The atmosphere in the studio had shifted entirely. The audience, who had once looked forward to Kimmel's usual banter and comedic jabs, was now on edge, sensing the gravity of the situation. It was as though time had slowed down. Kimmel, his usual swagger reduced to nothing but a fading echo, sat there, his face tense, eyes darting around the stage as he tried to recalibrate. He wasn't used to being outmatched, especially not by someone like Kristi Noem, someone who had the audacity to not only challenge him, but to do so with a quiet force that left him questioning his own tactics. Noem, however, didn't seem to be relishing the victory. She wasn't gloating or even looking for applause. Instead, she sat back, her gaze steady, unshaken by the awkward silence that enveloped the set. Her composure was the real weapon here, calm, unwavering, and entirely unyielding. Kimmel, though clearly rattled, was not about to let this go quietly. He cleared his throat, his voice betraying the frustration building inside him. "You know, Kristi," Kimmel began, his words slow and deliberate, "you've been sitting here throwing accusations about media bias, about political correctness. But let's get real here. Aren't you just using those talking points to distract from the fact that you've alienated the very people who could help your state? You've dug your heels in so far that you've lost sight of the bigger picture." Noem's eyes didn't flicker. She didn't even blink. Her response came swiftly, like a blade cutting through his words. "The bigger picture, Jimmy, is that people are tired. Tired of the same old political games. Tired of being told what to think, how to act, what to say. They want leaders who won't back down when it matters most. They want someone who doesn't cave under pressure. And that's what I've given them." Kimmel's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The weight of her answer hung in the air, louder than any retort he could muster. He had expected this to be just another easy interview, another opportunity to play the role of the clever comedian who had all the answers. But now, he was fighting for control of the narrative, and he could feel it slipping away by the second. The audience, now fully aware of the deeper stakes of this exchange, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had been expecting a typical late-night show, But what they were witnessing now was something far more intense, something raw and real. Kristi Noem wasn't just sparring with Kimmel, she was challenging the very framework of late-night television, pushing back against the expectations that had been built around these kinds of interviews. Noem wasn't interested in performing for an audience. She wasn't here to entertain. She was here to make a statement. Kimmel, for all his experience, had no answer to that. He had long prided himself on being able to outwit his guests, especially those from the political world. But now, faced with a woman who refused to back down, he found himself on the defensive for the first time in years. He finally gathered himself enough to continue. So what you're saying is that it's okay to push people aside, to defy national guidance, just because you think you know better? You think that's leadership? He asked, his voice now tinged with a mixture of disbelief and anger. Noem's gaze sharpened, her posture straightening as she leaned forward. Her next words came without hesitation, each one deliberate and firm. I think leadership is about having the courage to make decisions even when they're not popular, even when they put you at odds with people who think they know better. Leadership isn't about pleasing everyone. It's about doing what's right, no matter the cost. The words hit Kimmel like a blow. He had been trying to corner her, to get her to admit to some misstep, some flaw, that would make her more palatable to his audience. But she was impervious, standing firm in her beliefs, refusing to allow the narrative to be shaped by anyone but herself. It was clear now that this wasn't just a political debate. It was a battle for control of the conversation. And Noem was winning. The camera zoomed in on her face as she continued, each word cutting deeper into the conversation. You keep asking about division, Jimmy. But what I don't understand is why you're so afraid of it. Division isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it's the only way to wake people up, to get them to think beyond the status quo. There was a collective intake of breath from the audience, as though they were all realizing something at once. Noem wasn't here to placate them. She wasn't interested in playing by their rules. She was here to challenge everything they had taken for granted, everything they had assumed about politics and the media. Kimmel's face had turned a shade darker, his usual jovial nature replaced by a simmering frustration. The audience could feel it. The tension in the room was unbearable. This wasn't the light-hearted back and forth they had expected. This was something far more intense, far more real. Are you really willing to risk everything for a message, Kristi? Kimmel asked, his voice low but sharp. To sacrifice everything for your political ambitions? For the first time in the interview, Noem's expression softened. She leaned forward, her voice quiet but resolute. I'm not sacrificing anything, Jimmy. I'm standing up for the people who have been ignored for far too long. And I'm not going to apologize for that. With those words, the tension that had built up over the past few minutes finally reached its peak. The audience, who had been waiting for something to break, could feel the shift. It wasn't just a heated exchange anymore. It was a full-on clash of ideals, one that could end only one way, with Noem's unwavering strength still standing firm, and Kimmel, now visibly shaken, realizing that he had lost this round. As the final moments of the exchange drew closer, the tension in the air was almost palpable. The audience, who had been sitting in stunned silence for what seemed like an eternity, could barely contain their emotions. There was a mixture of awe, confusion, and disbelief as they watched the confrontation unfold. Jimmy Kimmel, a man who had dominated the late-night landscape for years with his sharp wit and quick comebacks, was now visibly struggling to regain his footing. His usual self-assured demeanor had evaporated into thin air, replaced by an uncomfortable nervousness that only grew with each passing second. He tried one last time, his voice trembling slightly, as he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing in a final attempt to regain control of the conversation. Kristi, you've made your point, Kimmel said, his words slow and almost pleading. But I still don't understand how you can stand there and pretend that this whole thing is about something bigger than yourself. It's about your career, your power, your image. And you're using all of this to fuel that, aren't you? Noam's gaze never faltered. She met his eyes, her face calm, her voice unwavering. Jimmy, what you don't understand is that it's never been about me, she said. It's always been about the people, about giving them a voice, about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. I've seen the way people are suffering, the way they've been neglected, and I won't let that go unnoticed. I'm not playing a game here. This isn't about power. It's about doing the right thing, no matter what it costs. Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. It was clear now that Noem wasn't just trying to win an argument. She was trying to change the narrative, to force people to look beyond the surface and consider the deeper implications of her actions. This wasn't a typical late-night appearance where a guest played along with the host's jabs and jokes. Noem had come with a purpose, and she wasn't leaving until that purpose had been made abundantly clear. Kimmel, now visibly rattled, leaned back in his chair. His hands rested on the desk in front of him, fingers fidgeting nervously as he tried to formulate one last response. But the words didn't come. He had no more comebacks, no witty retorts left. The reality of the situation had finally set in. He had been outmatched. The silence that followed was deafening. The audience sat frozen, unsure of how to react. They had been expecting a typical late-night exchange, but what they had witnessed was far from ordinary. It was a clash of ideologies, a battle of wills, and in that moment, it was clear who had come out on top. Noam's strength, her unwavering conviction, had silenced Kimmel, and the entire studio was left to process the magnitude of what had just happened. Kimmel had been caught off guard, his usual ability to control the conversation shattered by a guest who refused to play by the rules. And in doing so, Kristi Noem had made a statement that would resonate far beyond the confines of that studio. The camera zoomed in on Kimmel's face, and for a brief moment, there was a flicker of vulnerability there, a crack in his otherwise polished persona. He had been humbled, forced to confront a reality he wasn't prepared for. Noam's message had landed, and it had landed hard. As the interview came to a close, Kimmel cleared his throat, attempting to regain some semblance of his usual composure. "Well, Kristi," he said, his voice quieter now, "I guess we'll just have to leave it there." Noam didn't offer a smile or a handshake. She simply stood up, her movements graceful and composed, as she made her way to the door. The studio's energy had shifted completely. No one clapped, no one cheered. It was as if the audience was still processing the sheer force of the moment they had just witnessed. As the camera cut to a commercial break, the crew rushed to reset the set, but the mood was anything but light. No one in the room would forget what had just transpired. Kimmel's usual bravado had been shattered, and Kristi Noem had made it clear that she was not to be underestimated. She had come to his stage, and with her strength and conviction, she had turned the tables in the most unexpected of ways. It wasn't just a defeat for Kimmel. It was a victory for Noem, a statement that resonated far beyond the walls of that studio. And as the credits rolled, viewers were left with one undeniable truth. Kristi Noem had just rewritten the rules of late-night television, and she wasn't about to apologize for it.